Jones Dry Goods. When you're done loading the grain, drive down and meet me there." "For sure, I will." At 34 years old and married with 4 children, his brother acted as if Jonas was still a young child. But Jonas was 20 years old enough to know his own mind, old enough to make his own way in the world. As Samuel walked off, Jonas quickly loaded the last 2 sacks and closed the tailgate. And war or no war, he was old enough to know who he wanted to marry. After all, Samuel had been 19 when he married Anna. There was no reason why Jonas couldn't marry his Katie and start farming his own land. Tonight, after storing the seed and before the hard work of planting began tomorrow, would be the time to talk to Dat. Years ago, when Samuel and Anna had set up housekeeping on the north section of the farm, Dat had let Jonas choose a quarter section of land for his own, and Jonas had chosen the woods in the east section. If he wanted to marry Katie in the fall, it was time for him to start building a house for the 2 of them. But he had to convince Dat to give him the time off to do it. He had been rehearsing what he would say ever since the idea had come to him. Climbing onto the wagon seat, Jonas picked up the reins. As he drove closer to the newspaper office, he was drawn by the excitement of the crowd. He wished he had the money to buy a copy of today's edition, but he'd have to make do with gleaning what he could from the crowd. Not that he read the newspaper often. The Amish didn't involve themselves in politics, as Dat always said. Not just Dat, but all of his family, all of the church community. But Jonas wanted to know what was happening in the world around him, especially during an exciting time like this. Ever since last spring, when the southern states fired on Fort Sumter, Jonas had found himself held captive by the events. As he came closer to the newspaper office, the large crowd forced the wagon to the far edge of the street. Everyone was focused on a man standing on a box in front of the Gazette's office, reading aloud from the paper that must be fresh off the press. Jonas only caught snatches of what he was reading, but the meaning was clear. A battle had been fought in a place called Pittsburgh Landing in Tennessee. He had nearly reached the far edge of the crowd when the speaker came to the end of the reading, listing the number of casualties. Then he read that the Confederates had been defeated, and a roar of dismay went up from the crowd that startled Jonas and spooked the horses. Jonas stood on the wagon box, leaning back on the reins to hold the horses in as well as he could, speaking to them in a low tone that he hoped would carry to the frightened team. The horses jostled the men at the edge of the crowd, and one of them looked around, annoyed. Jonas met his eyes before turning his attention back to his team. It was Ned Hamlin. Ned and his father weren't farmers, but lived off the land in the wild, swampy area on the other side of Weaver's Creek, east of the Weaver's farm. Ned spat in the dirt next to the wagon wheel, then grinned at Jonas. "One federal victory ain't gonna win this war, right?" Jonas clenched his teeth to keep from entering into an argument with Ned. "I need to move on." Ned stepped back. "Sure you do. You and all your cowardly family. Amish don't fight?" "I say Amish can't fight. They're too busy running scared with their tails between their legs." Jonas tightened sweaty fingers around the reins as one of Ned's companions noticed them. He clapped Ned on the shoulder. "Them Amish are all Lincoln's lackeys, ain't they? Doing whatever he wants." Clucking to the team, Jonas drove away from the boisterous crowd, toward the block past the courthouse where Samuel would be waiting. A different kind of crowd gathered along the boardwalk, keeping their distance from Ned Hamlin and his like. These men were quieter, grouped in 2s and 3s, reading the